You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Get up, it's game day, everybody. Happy Ole Miss Arkansas game day. I'm Steven Willis, the host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We're going to be joined in a second by John Macon Gillespie from the Ole Miss on SI page on the internet and all that. I keep wanting to say the Grove Report, but it's Ole Miss on SI. You can check them out. We feature a lot of their stuff on this channel. He's going to come out and talk about what's going on, what they have going, and all of that stuff. We're going to talk about winning history in Fayetteville. We're going to talk about the latest injury report. Jackson Dart is chasing some history, and what are the keys for today? But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. John Macon Gillespie from Ole Miss on SI. How we doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well, Stephen. Little stopped up. The weather here in North Mississippi this time of year is always a little rough on me, but other than that, I can't really complain.
Yeah, it's just that time of year, and people walking around. It's 85 degrees down here on Halloween. It's just it's unnatural. I can remember when I was a kid having to put a coat and being upset that I had to put a coat over my costume because it was routinely 30, 35 degrees.
Yeah, no, that's how it was with me too. I was not happy to have to wear a coat over my Spider-Man or Ninja or whatever I happened to be that year. Both of those actually were costumes that I had as a child. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, you know how it is here. I mean, we go from 85 one day to down in the 50s or 40s the next day. I mean, that's just kind of how it is here, and it just wreaks havoc on my sinuses.
Yeah, and honestly, it did. That one of the reasons I ended up having to leave was because of the allergies that I had. That would just it's just a horrible place for allergies to be. It's a little bit better in Tennessee. It's a little bit better in Florida, but it's like that little alley going through is just like the sweet spot for all the allergies and the temperature changes and all of that stuff as well. Listen, John, today is, I say, it's one of the biggest football games in Ole Miss history, and it's not because of who Ole Miss is playing. It's because of what it could lead to. And Ole Miss has to come out and win in a place in Fayetteville against the Arkansas Razorbacks that they've won twice since 2000. We talked to Bill Flowers, who was on that 2000 team, and I asked him to say, hey, what was the memorable thing about winning there? And he's like, yeah, Matt Jones got pitched in the butt by a streaker in that game, and that's what he could remember from that football game. And I talked with John Neighbors from Locked On Razorbacks about that and all of that good stuff. But there's a lot of interesting stuff on top of the history of winning in Fayetteville. Jackson Dart, with one more win during the regular season, will become the winningest quarterback in Ole Miss football history. They say modern history, but that's because they just didn't keep up with that stat before then. And just the number of games that they played and the eligibility rules before 1968, it is highly unlikely that a starting quarterback won 25 games in 3 years. So just because of that, you can just go ahead and say that Jackson Dart's the winningest quarterback in history. He's likely going to break the total offense record today. He only needs about 250 yards passing and rushing to do that. And he is well on pace to becoming the all-time passing leader. So we have hit the stage of the season to where history is in the cards for Jackson Dart. Ole Miss is still playing for the playoffs and for a massive game with the Georgia Bulldogs that could come with game day. And all of that goes back to winning a place that you don't normally win in. And of course, it had to come down to this.
Yeah, that's pretty fitting, right? I think that you're right. I think today is massive for a few different reasons for Ole Miss. That obviously a win today sets up something huge next week. I mean, we're talking potential college game day. We're talking the biggest hurdle coming into the season that everybody looked at as far as playoff chances were concerned, the Georgia Bulldogs. Okay, that was going to be on paper the toughest team Ole Miss was going to play this year. That sets up a massive game at Oxford next week if Ole Miss is able to win today. If they lose, a lot of that's out the window. But as far as Jackson Dart is concerned, you know, I don't think he's super concerned about the personal accolades. At least when he's talked to us, he hasn't been. But I do think that it would be pretty cool, and it's kind of noteworthy too that he's been able to do this with all the quarterbacks Ole Miss has had throughout the year. It kind of shows how much he's grown since that first year in 2022. Just his progression as a player has been pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, and Ole Miss fans are weird about this. Everybody has a favorite, and there's probably a quarterback from their era whenever they were aged 13 to 15. That's kind of the way this quarterback rule goes. There's a whole bunch of people that talks about how great Matt Corral was and how great it would be if Matt Corral was a quarterback of this team. And from my age, I remember Tommy Luke. I remember Russ Showers. That was my sweet spot. You were obviously a young man with Eli. Was it Eli?
Yeah, Eli's the first quarterback I remember. I remember Eli, Michael Spurlock, Jevin Sneed, some guys in between there who weren't that great.
Ethan Flatt, Seth Adams, yeah.
Yeah, that trio there during that time. Yeah, I would say my hat is probably hung on the Eli hat rack at the end of the day, probably.
Yeah, my hat honestly is hung on the Eli hat rack as well because he was amazing, just pure and simple. But like the first quarterback that I can remember at Ole Miss was Kent Austin. He's the one that I remember. I remember Kelly Powell actually fairly clearly. Austin came back in '84, and then the Mark Young years started, and that's when I was really formed in becoming an Ole Miss fan. But I hate that I missed John Forcade. John Forcade has been on my show numerous times, but that's the last quarterback that I do not remember at Ole Miss was John Forcade.
Yeah, mine is actually Romero Miller. I was alive for that, but I wasn't conscious, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. I don't remember that. But Romero Miller's from my neck of the woods, kind of. He's from about an hour where I grew up. So
okay, he's from Shannon, and
yep.
and so where did you grow up?
Vardaman, Mississippi.
Okay. North Mississippi is weird for me because I'm from just south of Jackson. I grew up and spent my elementary schools in Florence and went to high school in Magee. And I found out this morning because Magee beat Seminary this week to go undefeated during the regular season and win their district. And this is the 10th time in 99 years of football that Magee has gone undefeated in the regular season, which means 20% of their undefeated seasons I was a part of because we went undefeated in 91 and 93. Now, we didn't win a state title. We don't have that ring at the end, but we do have that interesting stat. So I thought that was pretty cool. It's also really cool that Magee won a district and went undefeated whenever Magee High School is not going to exist in a couple of years.
Yeah, so are they the Trojans? Is that right?
Yes, they are the Trojans.
Yeah. That's what I thought. I've been through Magee before, but never been to a game there. But I was thinking they were the Trojans. Yeah.
Yeah, I played Mendenhall. That's the huge rival, the Simpson County Super Bowl. But I played them 3 times, and none of the games were played at Magee's High School Stadium or Mendenhall's High School Stadium. Every game was played in Jackson at Memorial Stadium.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. We were really good at football then. At the year that Mon Nicholson and Morris Scott and those guys at Louisville took us down my senior year, nobody expected Louisville to win that game. That is how good we were. And we just went out there and completely crapped the bed.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the kind of memories that stick with you in a bad way, I think.
Yeah.
So Vardaman has a pretty big history of football too, but they weren't very good when I was in high school, but they're actually undefeated going into the playoffs this year as well. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool. Yeah.
It is pretty cool. I just happened to see it whenever I was doing my morning walk this morning, and I saw the post on Facebook whenever I was uploading that from Magee High that they went undefeated and beat Seminary, which is weird that Magee High is playing Seminary, and it shows how district and classifications change over time. Whenever I was in high school, Seminary was a 1A school.
Yeah. Things, especially with these smaller Mississippi towns, it feels like things fluctuate really, really heavily. I have a day job at Calhoun City High School, go Wildcats, and the talk is that we're probably going to drop down to 1A, actually, which Calhoun City's been 1A like once all time. Been 2A most of their history. So I mean things fluctuate in these small towns a lot. And it is really interesting to follow.
And the funny thing is, like a school that doesn't exist anymore, Bassfield High School, I think they became like Jefferson Davis County High School. But Bassfield High School, we used to joke about, was a count man school. And what that meant is when the count man came, that that kind of told how big these were, whether you were 1A, 2A, or 3A. There were a certain number of kids that were sent to stand behind the gymnasium while he was counting so that they could stay at the lower classification. And Bassfield, they were just hell from the beginning. But that type of stuff did used to go on in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah. Yeah. People fudging their numbers has always been a little bit of a talk. And when you see them suit up, I mean, you can kind of see it a little bit. It's like, all right, this is either a really, really big 2A or else every boy in that school plays football. Like it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
You look out there, there's a 2A football game, and one side has 85 football players and the other side has 22. And you're like, no, this is not going to go well.
No.
Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're going to get back to the Arkansas game real quick. We're going to talk about our keys to the game. We're going to talk about the defense and what John Neighbors from Locked On Razorbacks is saying about this game. And, of course, in the third segment, we're going to tell you the updated lines and give our score predictions. Stick around for that. But first, I do want to let you know about 5 Hour Energy. What's up, Ole Miss fans? Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy knows that being passionate football fans, it just isn't a hobby. It's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, and even those agonizing second overtimes. That's why we've created Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy shots with a special flavor called Fan Fuel, designed just for super fans like us. You know, the type of fans that are the first in the grove and the last to leave. We see you and everything that you do. You know what gave me my fan fuel this week, though? It was the moment when Jackson Dart last week completed the scramble pass to Michael Davis. Man, that whole stadium was rocking. And with this big matchup today against the Arkansas Razorbacks, the energy is electric, and everything seems to be in place for an electric close. 5 Hour Energy knows no matter what team you root for, being a fan takes heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're preparing for a big tailgate or even ironing your jersey, the game day's to-do list is never short. So that is why the limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Hour Energy shot is here to keep you going all season long. So what's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy. Get yours at 5hourenergy.com. It's available and shipped nationwide. Let's go, Rebels. All right, John, the keys to the game in this one, there's 3 players that I'm looking at that potentially are going to have major influences on this game. And these are the players that I have on my list. Now, obviously, Jackson Dart. I'm like news at 11. The quarterback's going to be important to winning a game. I know that. Ulysses Bentley, who officially moved up to second on the depth chart, which I don't know what that means at all, and I don't know how much everybody's going to see Bentley, but I do think that Ulysses Bentley is the only Ole Miss running back to run for 100 yards in an SEC game. I think that is noteworthy against a team that beat Arkansas on this field 34-10, and I think Suntarine Perkins is going to be a major key. He was the spy for Jalen Milroe just a year ago, the athleticism that Talon Green possesses, and Suntarine Perkins, he is the athlete that can kind of do work on that side of the ball. What say you?
I think out of those, well, first I agree with all 3 of those, but I think out of those 3, I think Perkins is the biggest one to me, just because of what Green brings to the table. Ole Miss hasn't faced a quarterback with this skill set yet this season, and I do think the defense is more than athletic enough to be able to handle that, and Perkins is going to be a big part of that. But that's been one of my big focuses coming into this week is what Talon Green is able to do as far as escapability is concerned, things like that. And, you know, we hear a lot of talk even from Lane Kiffin about how much Suntarine Perkins has progressed as a player over the last year and a half or so, however long it's been. And I think we'll see some evidence of that today, or at least I think that's Ole Miss's plan anyway, is to see some evidence of that. I think he will be in a role like that, and it'll be largely up to him to kind of keep an eye on Green and keep him, you know, from breaking a big one on the ground.
Yeah, and Green is now he has the skill set similar to anybody that is my age will remember what Matt Jones looked like for Arkansas when he was there for like 10 years. He has that skill set. He's not quite as fast. He is not side to side as quick as Matt Jones, but you're going to see a lot of similarities of having a tall, lanky, long strider playing quarterback, and that's probably going to trigger some Ole Miss fans.
Yeah, I think so. And it'll. Again, I think that Ole Miss's defense is up for this challenge. I think that they have enough athleticism up front. Especially you see the stats right there. I think they have enough athleticism up front to be able to kind of keep him in check. Now he may break a run or two or something like that. Like I'm not going to say he's going to be sacked 7 times today or anything like that, but I do think that Ole Miss has enough athleticism to be able to kind of keep him in check. Um, and I think honestly, the secondary, if they don't commit a bunch of penalties, I think they'll be okay too. So if you can force him into some mistakes, which he's been prone to do a little bit, I think that'll really be a big boost for Ole Miss today.
Yeah, and you mentioned the secondary, and the secondary probably since the start of LSU play, they've been much better. The Kentucky game was essentially lost because of defensive penalties. And they reared their head a little bit in the first half of that Oklahoma game, but they were able to get that under control in the second half and completely dominated the second half of that game. This is a situation to where if Ole Miss just played clean football all year, just clean, nothing special, Ole Miss is 7 or 8-0 right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And you're right. I mean, the penalties last week in the first half were an issue, obviously, but Ole Miss's defense in the second half was lights out, and you can kind of maybe credit that. I mean, I guess we'll kind of learn more about that today, but you can maybe credit some of that to coming off of a bye week a little bit. Kind of the rust deal of that. But
I
yeah,
think they're
I think you're
changing
right.
identity a little bit too.
Well, that too, yes.
Mm.
But I think you're right that the secondary has played a lot better since really that LSU. I mean, even against South Carolina, I mean, it wasn't that bad. So, uh, I think that's going to be another big key today. And Green is known for some issues in decision making. I mean, if you can get a little pressure on him and keep him from scrambling all over the place,
He'll throw
you,
you the
you may
ball.
be able to, yeah, you may be able to force him into some errors. And with an offense that has sputtered some, during SEC play, I think that can be big to get some of those turnovers.
And also don't overestimate or underestimate having Chris Paul and knowing exactly what gives that defense problems. And don't think that Lane Kiffin didn't go ask that question. So
Oh
what
yeah,
that is, whatever gave that defense problems when he was up there in Fayetteville, because the same coordinator, a lot of the same players, they're doing a lot of the same stuff, and they're going to try and match it up on film. Yeah, Chris Paul is going to say, hey, we hate it when other teams did this.
well, and another reason that I said out of those three that Perkins was the biggest focus for me, the biggest key player in this, um, was because I think that, yeah, and I think you've talked about it some on your show, that Ole Miss needs to lean into the defense right now being the strength of this team. I don't think Ole Miss has to score 31, 38 points to win this game today. I think they just have to slow down Arkansas, and you can get in the mid to high 20s and probably be okay. And playing on the road, potentially without Trey Harris, we don't really know about that yet. That can be really big. If you can just stop Arkansas's offense and get a 10, 14 point lead, something like that, and then just hold them off, you should be okay today.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you talk, Ole Miss fans are kind of like the whole battered Aggie syndrome and all of that they have that. Offensively, Ole Miss needs to be able to score 40 to 50 points in a game because they are so terrified of their defense. The fact that the defense is the strength of their team, I think that people are genuinely uncomfortable with that. They would be more comfortable in a game that looked like a week ago in Mississippi State, where it was 58 to 25. That is their wheelhouse. That is their comfort zone. They are not comfortable with 17 to 10. They do not know how to deal with that.
They're not used to it because that has not been the way Lane Kiffin teams have looked since he's been
Mhm.
in Oxford. And I think part of it too is because fans see that there are a good number of weapons on this offense, and they're just not putting up the amount of points that they have been previously, in the last few years. I think that is kind of shaking them a little bit. but they're also just not used to the defense being able to kind of win them football games like they have been. So, I think that
And
this
I
week,
think
especially
I
with
think the clock rules are big in that too, and I'll explain that in a minute.
I think that this week, where you've struggled historically to win in Fayetteville, I know none of these players really have cared about that since 2008, but uh, a place that you've historically struggled to win, lean into your defense, get enough points, not an absurd amount of points, just get enough points and then get out of there. I think that's the goal.
Yeah, and I was going to say the clock rules that are up there. I think there are two teams in the Southeastern Conference that is giving up more than 400 yards per game defensively, which means that everybody's having trouble offensively this year.
That's
The
Mississippi
clock,
State and who?
yeah, it's Mississippi State and somebody else. I just like maybe Vandy. No, it's somebody where they were able to do it, but it's two teams that's over 400, and they're not much over 400.
Mm.
The second one is now State is like a generationally bad defense.
Yeah,
Like
they're
if you
rough.
could, yeah, you can run the ball at all, you're going to be able to kill them. It was no doubt that Arkansas was able to do what they did against Mississippi State a week ago because they are so predicated on running the football and then doing play action pass off of it. So Taylor Green having a big game off of play action pass, it was a piece of cake because if you can run the football, you can run the ball in Mississippi State.
And that's why I think this is kind of a good matchup for Ole Miss because of how good that run defense has been. We saw some of those stats a second ago about the rankings of the defense so far this year. The run defense, outside of a couple times last week in SEC play, has still been really good. So, I think that's why this matchup up front, Ole Miss's defense against the running game and Taylor Green is what I'm going to be watching most today.
Yeah, and I wouldn't try and move what Jackson Arnold did over to what Taylor Green did is going to do because Ole Miss played a ton of two-man defense against Jackson Arnold because they did not expect Jackson Arnold to run the football, and you never play two-man against athletic running quarterbacks, and Ole Miss got surprised in the early part of that game. That's what happened there. Anyway, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Whenever we come back, we will talk about the final touches on this Ole Miss Arkansas game, keys, final score, all of that good stuff. Stick around. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets when you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Ole Miss is currently a 7.5-point favorite over the Arkansas Razorback, but we all know how weird this series can be. If you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the play-by-play, and all that on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's do our finishing touches on this game real quick. This is a game I spoke with John Neighbors on Thursday, and he had this to say. He said if Ole Miss gets up by 2 touchdowns in this game, 14 points really at any point in the game, but especially in the second half, it is over. And with Ole Miss's defense, that makes a ton of sense, John, but it could also be a story about Arkansas's offense and how dependent they are on the run game and the play action pass. And they're not built like you would think a Bobby Petrino team is for coming back. I think this is a statement of honestly a deficiency, and they've made the most out of it in Arkansas's offense. But Ole Miss needs to front run in this game, do they not?
I think so. Yeah, I think getting out to a 10, 14-point lead in, maybe before halftime or early in the second half, I think that would be huge, honestly, because like you said, you're going up against an offense that is so, I don't know if reliant is the right word, but they're built around running the football and the play action pass. And obviously those two things are not very well suited for coming back from big chunk deficits like that, a 2-score, 3-score deficit. So Yeah, I think Ole Miss getting out to an early lead, potentially getting out to a decently sizable lead would be huge. And I'm not going to say that Arkansas couldn't come back from that, but I do think that it would really put them behind the eight ball pretty early.
Listen, Ole Miss is due for Arkansas not to play well at home. They get Arkansas's best every time they go up to Fayetteville. And they lay an egg and do a 7-3 against Mississippi State or get beat 34-10 by LSU. Arkansas has not been playing particularly well in Fayetteville except when Ole Miss is in town. If you remember 2022, I think at the beginning of the third quarter, Arkansas was up 42-7 in that game, just completely firing on all cylinders. In 2020 was the weird 6-interception game where I think it was Hudson Clark had 3 interceptions in that game. He's had 2 more the rest of his Arkansas career. Weird things happen in this game. And if Ole Miss can make it mundane, if they can handle what's going on, I think Ole Miss is going to be able to win this game in this neighborhood of 24-10. I think my prediction in this game would be 24-10.
Yeah, my official prediction on the piece we put out yesterday on Ole Miss on SI was, I think, 28-24. I think I've backed off of that a little bit. I think it's going to be more 28-17-ish, maybe 28-14. I don't think Ole Miss is going to have just a massive scoring day. I don't think they're going to put up 35, 40 points in this thing. But I do think that Ole Miss's defense will have enough of an answer for Arkansas's offense to be able to kind of give Ole Miss a little bit of a cushion, and then maybe Arkansas scores late or something, and in an attempt to try to come back or just narrow the deficit some. Yeah, I think that's probably pretty close to right. I might put it a little closer than that. But yeah, I think that I do think Ole Miss wins today. I think the matchups are in their favor for this one, and history out the window or whatever, which I don't really like to do. But I mean, none of these players. How old would these players have been in 2008? Do we have any idea the math on that?
Some of them would probably not even be alive.
Yeah, so like that's they don't care about that.
But Jackson Dart does remember 2022. He knows that one.
That's true. Yeah, that is very much true.
Mm.
So, but I mean, I don't think it'll necessarily be in their minds that, hey, Ole Miss hasn't won here since 08. But, again, I think from a pure matchup standpoint, I think this is Ole Miss's game.
Coming up after the game, about an hour after the game concludes, we will have a post-game show. We'll take your comments and all of that to have an instant overreaction. John, what do you got going on at the end of the game? What's your schedule for today?
Well, we're going to have in-game updates like we always do up on the site in story form. I'll be handling that today, just kind of drive-by-drive, score updates, that kind of thing, a story that updates throughout the game. We'll have that. We'll have a halftime recap. We'll have any kind of breaking news stuff that happens during the game, kind of quick hitting stories on that. Have a post-game piece, like a quick recap, and then we'll have post-game analysis pieces going up throughout the evening, probably until you go to bed tonight, if I had to guess, but and even into Sunday morning as well. So it's a busy day for us, but we do like 11 o'clock kickoffs because we get to kind of sit back and watch a little bit more football once Ole Miss is done. So.
Yeah, and the injury report, when you look at it, it doesn't mean too much, but Trey Harris and Nate Kalepo listed as questionable. What do you think happens there?
I really don't know. I am curious about Harris's status, okay, because obviously the way I've understood it, at least on the reporting that happened during the LSU game, was that it's been 2 separate lower body injuries, the one against South Carolina and the one against LSU. That's the way I kind of understood it. Now, I haven't gotten any confirmation on that, but he's obviously not going to be 100% if he goes today, but I am curious to see if he's able to suit up and go because he wasn't even dressed out last week. I mean, he was wearing his jersey and street clothes on the sideline against Oklahoma. So I am interested to see that. I do think Ole Miss's offense will be okay without him, but obviously having him would be a help.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, John Macon Gillespie from Ole Miss on SI. I hope everybody that is traveling up to Fayetteville is careful and has a good time. Anybody that's watching the game, you can catch it on ESPN at 11 o'clock Central Time as well. And like I said, our post-game show will be up about an hour after the show. and we'll have a reaction roundtable on Sunday night, just like we always do. But for John Macon Gillespie, I'm Steven Willis from Locked On Ole Miss. We'll see you next time. Hotty toddy, and be safe if you're headed to Fayetteville.